Hello, you're listening to Leveraging Thought Leadership. I'm your host, Bill Sherman, and today we're talking about one of my passions, organizational thought leadership. That is, the people who create, curate, and deploy thought leadership on behalf of their organizations. My guest today is Mike Mansfield. He's the program director for the Aegon Center for Longevity and Retirement, which is a collaboration of experts assembled by Aegon with representation from Europe, the Americas, and Asia. In today's episode, we'll talk about his work with the center. At the time of recording, their 2020 Retirement Readiness Report was recently published. So we talk about the center, the report itself, as well as the complexity of producing a global research study during the COVID-19 pandemic. Mike has been with Aegon for 17 years, and before working for the Center for Longevity and Aging, he served as a sustainability officer and internal auditor. We'll also explore the perspective of someone with an auditing and accounting background and what they bring to the world of thought leadership. All right, let's begin. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks, Bill.
So let's begin. Many people who get into thought leadership arrive from different roads. Tell me quickly a little bit of your story, how you got here and what you're doing now.
Great. Actually, I got here through rather a circuitous route. I've been working at Aegon for the past 17 years. And my last job before I started this role was actually in our sustainability department. And within the sustainability department, we were really looking at the social value Aegon has and how we could help people achieve a lifetime of financial security. And that was a real natural lead in to looking at that a little deeper and looking at the retirement research and what that means for Aegon.
So you went from sustainability and the social piece to working with thought leadership. And I think one of the topics that's important for you is the social contract in between individuals, communities, governments, employers. Could you say a little bit about that and some of the research that you've been doing at Aegon?
Sure. And I think this really goes back to our purpose in terms of helping people achieve a lifetime of financial security. What we've seen is that the retirement securities in many countries are based on three pillars: how governments, employers, and individuals all contribute to a sustainable retirement system. But there's a lot of financial strain on governments and employer-based retirement plans, and there's a lot of responsibility shifting to individuals. And that's oftentimes a responsibility that people either aren't equipped or don't feel comfortable to take on their shoulders. So we really wanted to empower people to make the decisions to get involved in the conversation and to really think about their retirement preparations and what that meant. So the new social contract is a series of papers and reports that we've brought out over the past 4 years, really looking in detail at how those social partners work together to create a sustainable retirement system for people.
And so that's research that's conducted with both working folks and some people who are retired, but looking across a global basis, correct?
That's correct. So we've been doing the research now for 9 years in total, and we cover 15 countries around the world. So we cover Europe, the Americas, Asia, and Australia. And have been doing the research because we really want to see how things are changing around the world and how that really is impacting people's ability to retire in a comfortable lifestyle, but taking really the best of what's working in different countries so that we can share best practices to come up with a new social contract for people.
Now, you're working inside Aegon's Center for Longevity and Retirement, and from what I understand, that's been around since 2015. Tell me a little bit of the story of how that center came to be. What sparked the creation? Because I'm assuming you weren't in a meeting one day and people said, yeah, we should create a center for this. So what's that story and how did the decision come about?
It's a good question. And no, it wasn't just one day in a conference room the center was born. Like I say, we've been doing the research now for 9 years. And so we started 2012, had been doing it for a couple of years, and we started the center in 2015. And I think after having done it for a few years, we realized this is an area we really want to make a difference. We want to make our name in this area in terms of our thinking and in terms of helping people understand what's happening. So the creation of the center was really a commitment to doing this over the longer term. It was a statement of the fact that, we're here to stay and to help people think about going forward, about the issue going forward. And I think what really helped us within the company when we set up the center was we set it up with an advisory board from people from our larger country units. They really gave us some great perspectives in terms of what's happening in the different markets, and also were a great way for us to connect with issues in the business and so on that we can take in and make sure that we incorporate those into our research.
So as you developed that process and said, okay, we've done this for a few years, we're ready to make a commitment going forward. One of the things that comes to my mind is you have to find where you're going to focus. And I think you alluded that a little bit in terms of where are we going to make a difference? How do we add to the conversation? So can you describe a little bit of that and tell me, where did you find your lane, which became the new social contract? How did you realize what you were going to talk about and add value rather than repeating what others were saying already?
And that's really, again, part of that evolutionary story. So when we started the research back in 2012, it really was quite a financially based conversation in terms of what does it take to financially prepare for retirement. And as we've been doing the research and speaking with other people, other thought leaders in the area, we've seen that preparing for retirement and really preparing for longer lives is more than just finance. That to be able to enjoy a longer life, you really have to have good health so that you can do the things you've been saving so hard for, but also that you're able to adapt to changes in the way we're living and working. So health was sort of woven into the story as we developed. And then again, we looked at what's changing in the world and saw that it's not just about wealth and having good health, but it's also about making sure that you are resilient, that you've got this, you're keeping your skills up to date, you have a focus on lifelong learning so that you are able to move along on the roller coaster of life. I mean, now even more than ever, we see it with COVID that people are really their resilience is being tested and they need to have as much in their arsenal as they can to make sure that they get through this crisis. And that's kind of where it evolved, and that's where we wanted to take the conversation to new social justice.
So we're recording in August of 2020, and COVID remains a very signal issue for 2020 and going forward. And so you've got a history of looking at issues of aging, health, and longevity. And so I want to ask you, one, did you see a difference in the data between, say, 2019 and 2020 when you asked those questions? And then two, how did the process of doing the survey evolve and change as you were working through COVID, right? So the topic was relevant, but you're talking to people at a time where their minds are elsewhere and trying to say, hey, we want to sit down with you and do a survey or interview by phone or online. Mm-hmm. It's not top of mind for a lot of people.
Indeed, and that was a point when we were doing the research. So we did the field work for the survey in late January. Mm-hmm. And at that point, COVID had been an issue in China and some other countries for a while.
And the survey covers China, correct?
Indeed, it does. It covers China, but it hadn't moved across to Western Europe, North America, to the point where it is right now. So our survey data was, for the most part, pre-COVID. So in writing the report, it was really one of the most challenging and interesting reports to write, for the fact that we had to translate the findings from the research and mirror that over what's going on in the world around us. So we saw a lot of things about how people want to live and work longer, but what needed to translate that into how companies are reacting to the changes in terms of changes in employment trends and so on, and be able to balance the message so that we can incorporate the trends of today with the findings we had from the research. And it actually turned out very well, I think, in terms of being able to get the right balance in the conversation, even though our research data didn't include all of the findings that might have been if we did the survey post-COVID.
Now, you mentioned you were in the field in January of 2020. which suggests you might be back in the field January 2021. And COVID likely to be present and having different impacts on different geographies. How, as you prepare for putting the next iteration of the survey into the field, how is your thinking being impacted? How are you and the team addressing this question?
It's a good question, and we haven't started the detailed planning in terms of the questionnaire that we'd send out yet for the 2021 survey. But I think we probably would be looking at many of the elements where people and how people save for their retirement. How are they thinking about job security? How are they thinking about their health? How are those factors playing into their plans and their ability to prepare for retirement? I think especially when you see labor contracts become more flexible in different countries, that's got pluses and minuses in terms of people's ability to move in and out of the job market. But it also means you lose an opportunity if you're used to a long-term relationship with an employer to save over the longer time or have health benefits over the longer time, which means, again, more responsibility shifting to the individual.
So we've talked about several iterations of the Retirement Readiness Survey and the center from its history. Let's talk a little bit about who you're trying to reach now. So as you said, you've been doing this for 9 years. Who is your target audience for the center? Who are you trying to reach and influence? Can you describe some of those target audiences and how you're trying to reach them?
I think I'd mentioned earlier that if you look at retirement systems in many countries, it's often based on 3 pillars: the individual, the employer, and the government. And when we're writing the reports, we always bring in recommendations for those 3 stakeholders. So they would be our main target audience in terms of who we want to reach with recommendations and engage in the conversation. And the way we've done it is we've tried to partner with organizations that reach a similar audience in terms of people and in terms of the level of people that we want to work with. So we've had a long-term relationship with organizations like the OECD, and have spoken at their forum and been involved in many of their programs. So we're involved in their Future of Work working group and other groups to make sure that we are really addressing issues with the right people so that we can get the message out there to people and engage them in the conversation.
So with the report, I can see that when you're trying to reach folks in government, public policy, NGOs, as well as employers, there are folks who will sit down, read a report, digest it as part of their role and responsibility. How about for the individual employee? How are you making that information and telling this story in a way that the individual worker somewhere around the world can access it and make better choices? Because you talked about that more responsibility is being put on their shoulders. How are you getting the information to them?
That's a good question, because much as I think our reports are wonderful, they are in many cases 40, 50, and sometimes even longer in terms of length. So, I don't think many people are going to read them cover to cover. So what we do with the reports is we try to bring a collateral that's engaging. And I think that's very important because it's really all about having an inclusive conversation. So what we've done in the past is we've brought out videos that are more targeted to individuals that we share on social media. We've run different campaigns. We did a report. So I'll back up a little bit. So we bring out the annual report every year. That's sort of the global look. We also bring out thematic reports that are looking at groups that are more vulnerable for retirement when it comes to preparing for retirement. And we did one this year on women. So the report we did looking at women's preparations, we had a really lovely series of social media posts around women looking forward and backward, like what advice would I give my older self or my younger self? And they were really engaging and really helped get the conversation going on social media. So I think that really helped the individual, as well as the policy folks we might more likely reach through areas like the OECD and so on.
So you're trying to reach different levels of audiences with different, although they're they're all invested in the topic. They have different degrees of time available to digest the information. So, how are you measuring success for reaching these audiences? And how do you know the message is being heard? Can you give me a story, an example, or are you using metrics? How do you gauge the effectiveness of the research readiness survey as well as the other materials you're putting out?
So we do that at various different ways. So in terms of the research that goes out, we would measure media reach once it goes out. So when we put the report out and we have our launch, we'll monitor the number of media outlets that cover it, which would be one to make sure to see how it was getting taken up in the press. Another important metric would be looking at speaking engagements to see if we're invited to speak at events like the OECD, and we were invited to speak at an event organized by the World Economic Forum recently as well, and other similar thought leaders like the AARP, very important for us as well. But also we would measure success in terms of some of the programs we're doing. How are we moving the needle and helping people prepare for their retirement? And one example would be a program we ran last year to help people who were age 50 and above think about entrepreneurship, for instance, was something for them. Was that going to help them feel more prepared for their retirement?
If you are enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about the podcast, please leave a 5-star review and share it with your friends. We are available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and all major platforms, as well as at leveragingthoughtleadership.com. So let's shift a little bit here, and I want to ask you a question. You've got a background, and you alluded to it earlier, where not only working in sustainability, but a background in accounting, right?
Yeah.
How does that past prepare you for what you're doing today? If you were to look back, and you were talking earlier about, what advice would I give my previous self? I'm guessing that when you went to college, you said, I'm not going to be writing research reports on longevity and retirement preparedness. So where's the through line? And how does it help you, your experiences that have gotten you here?
I'm not sure in college I even knew there was a job called retirement researcher. So
very fair. Very fair.
I am certainly a chameleon. I started off life, as you say, I studied accounting in college. I became an auditor. And from there moved into sustainability. And I think I've learned things as I went along. And I really have been wonderfully fortunate to have so many opportunities. I think as an auditor, you're trained and it's ingrained in you to think about things from the perspective of what can go wrong, what's out there influencing systems that's going to make them either not work or make them work better. And that really does help when you're looking at the topic of retirement, living longer, because you're really looking at things like, what's influencing it and what can we play with to make sure that we've got a more robust system. And then I think the move into sustainability really was looking at what we as a company can do to create systems that will work in the long term. As a life insurance and pension company, we're making people or have a relationship with people over a 30, 40, 50-year period. We need to be around for the long term. So what's it going to take for us to develop a system that is sustainable, where no one gets left behind, and a system where when the sands of responsibility are shifting, that people feel empowered and that there is fairness in the system and fairness in the discussion. So that those two areas, the audit and the sustainability, I really think help give me some balance and focal points in terms of thinking about the research and thinking about where we want to focus our messaging.
Wonderful. The reason I asked that question is for most of the guests on this podcast, as well as people who are practicing in thought leadership, it's a second or a third career. And what I typically find is that your past roles really inform sort of the mindset you bring to the thought leadership work that you're doing. And
I think
so
so.
it's really interesting to see how that auditor's sort of attention to detail and looking and saying what could go wrong makes total
Yeah,
sense of how it would connect to planning a survey. And then you also have the things where even when you ask what could go wrong, they're the large unexpected events such as COVID, where
yeah,
you think something could happen, but you're not really prepared for it to happen at the scale and the magnitude, perhaps, right?
absolutely. And I think just even as a short aside, I mean, it was a big step to move from audit to sustainability. But I think if you have that mindset of what can I take from my past and bring it to my future, my way of getting into sustainability was convincing people within Aegon that, here's the auditor guy. So looking at sustainability, we need to have our non-financial numbers right. So let me take care of making sure that the numbers are right. And I work really closely with a colleague who was a journalist by background. So, I was the numbers dude and he was the writer, and together
Mm-hmm.
we're a good team. And again, you take what works in the past and you make it work again in the future.
So I'd like to put you a little bit on the spot and ask you a question.
Uh-oh.
We've been talking about thought leadership. I'd like to ask you how you define thought leadership. What is it? You've talked about working with thought leaders from other organizations and
Mhm.
individuals. I'd like to hear your perspective. How do you define it, and how does it serve the organization?
So I think, like, for me, thought leadership is really getting people to take the next step in terms of the way they're thinking, and in looking at ways of considering different perspectives and different issues that might impact the way the world is evolving around them. I think that that's very important in terms of what we want to do, achieve with thought leadership. So it's really getting more into the mix of our discussions. But I think to make it work, it really, what I've learned is that it's a people game as much as a knowledge game. You're really trying to convince people to get involved in the conversation. You really have to be inclusive in terms of encouraging people with different perspectives to get involved and bring that message across in a way that's both empowering and achievable for people. So a way
So
that
I'd
makes
like to
sense.
ask you there for an
Yeah.
example on getting voices involved. So when you say, hey, we're looking at issues of longevity and retirement, that's a big issue that no individual or organization can tackle on their own. How are you bringing voices? How are you joining the conversation and making sure that others are heard, included, and that they're part of the conversation, the right voices that might not be center stage get lifted up? Can you give an example or a story of either what you're doing or when it works well?
Yeah, sure. So I think internally we sort of look at it from the business perspective and getting people in from different parts of the business in terms of what's changing in their world. But looking outside as well, I think we need to have both an internal and external perspective. We've been working very closely with an organization called the Leiden Academy for Vitality and Aging here in the Netherlands. And like you can imagine from the name of the organization, they're really focused on helping people achieve wellness throughout their life. And the program I mentioned earlier about people who might be interested in entrepreneurship in their 50s and above, we did that project with them because we really wanted to look at the fact that there are stereotypes out there about what it is to be older, about the contribution people make at different stages in their lives. So we wanted to break that stereotypes and develop that program.
So, how did that project go? Can you give an example or a story of how that came to life and the results that happened?
Sure. So it was a project. So we've been doing research for a while and seeing that people's views on aging and their transition to retirement is changing. So only a third of people now see retirement as a cliff edge event. The majority want some form of transition to retirement. That's a great finding, but you need to move from findings to something that's concrete. So with the Leiden Academy for Vitality and Aging, we ran a program to help people discover if entrepreneurship was something for them. And we put them on a course to see how you develop a business plan, how you pitch your idea, and so on. And the wonderful thing was the winner was a gentleman who was 82 years of age. He started up a business which was based on an idea he had for his life. He was 82, he lived on his own, he wanted to live independently on his own, but still wanted to feel connected, and developed an app that would allow him to do that. And I think that program really helped us understand that people are living longer, they can make a contribution. So all the things I mentioned before in terms of maintaining good health, lifelong learning, this was how you tie all those things together and make sure that people can stay economically active, committed to their dreams, and live out what they really want to do throughout their life. So it was definitely the feel-good program for last year.
Well, and that's a great stereotype breaking example. So if I were to say, picture a app developer in your mind, the image is not the 82-year-old gentleman, saying, I've got an idea to make life easier on how to live. You come up with an entirely different image in your head. And
if I could be a mind reader, it's probably a guy with a hoodie in a garage or something.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. Whether in Silicon Valley, Silicon Alley,
Bingo.
All sorts of places in the world where you've got someone with a coding mindset. And instead, you have someone who's approaching it from the other side saying, I want to stay connected. I need to use technology to help me stay connected with family, friends, the world, whatever I need, and solving a problem through technology rather than coming the other way at it and saying, I know technology, what problems need to be solved.
Absolutely. And the one thing he said at the end of the program when we interviewed him, he said, when you retire, it's all lovely to drink coffee with your friends and travel and so on, but you really should ask yourself the question, what do I want to become? And it stuck in my head because, to me, it shows that at all stages in life, we have a contribution to make. A program like that can really help give somebody the confidence and empower them to take the next step.
In the spirit of what do I want to become, which I think is a great sort of motto for all of us as we go forward. The focus in this conversation is for thought leadership practitioners. How do we become better at what we do, right? And that's an evolutionary process. You've been doing this for a while, so I know that there are many listeners out there who are new to the practice of thought leadership, either creating content, deploying it, curating it. My question for you is, what advice would you give to someone who is relatively new to the role of thought leadership for their organization? Maybe a tip or two that you've learned along the way that would make life easier. Where should someone focus their effort?
I think one thing I learned, I think it's something, maybe it's from coming from more a technical role as an auditor, is that you often, as you're trained as an auditor to kind of know accounting rules and know how things work. And over the course of time, I've learned that people really are the motor behind what makes things work. And research really is about people. It has to be about people. So include people in the conversation. Talk to people about ideas. Everybody has an idea out there, and you need to hear as many of them as you can so that you can put them together in your head and come up with how they link together, how it impacts one person's view of the world and how that impacts others. So understanding other perspectives, talking to people really is crucial, and not just to focus on only on the technical part, which is absolutely very important. I mean, your research has to be accurate, has to be super high quality, but people and engagement within and outside the organization is really important, building allies.
I think that's so true. Thought leadership is a catalyst to help focus energy and conversation. It helps people see around corners. And like you said a little bit earlier, identify the next steps to take.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to do it on your own, you're pushing the boulder up the side of the hill. You have to recruit many hands towards a shared vision to achieve any success on any project that's really worthy of thought leadership.
And I think it's only a shared vision is going to have resonance within a company. It can't just be your vision. I mean, you're one person within a company, but many people at all levels have to do it. I mean, you have to have executive sponsorship who see that it's important. You have to have people in the business who can talk to their clients about it. You have to be able to have people who can use it within the company, HR people to help move the conversation as well. So it is really, ambassadors are really important.
So, as we wrap up now, Mike, I want to ask you, we've talked a lot about the Retirement Readiness Survey and the Center for Longevity and Retirement. If people want to learn more, either about the survey or the center, where should they go? How can they find some of the work that you and your team are doing?
Well, it'd be great if they wanted to get in touch. They could get in touch with me directly, Mike Mansfield at aegon.com. Or you can visit our website, aegon.com, where you can see the research. There's a tab on our website that has got all our previous research. So it is all available on the website. And you can also see some of the work that we do in our collaboration with our colleagues at the nonprofit Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies in the US and the Institute for Longevity in Brazil as well.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks a million, Bill.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please join our LinkedIn group, Organizational Thought Leadership. It's a professional community where thought leadership practitioners talk shop about our field. So if you're someone who creates, curates, or deploys thought leadership for your organization, then please join the conversation in the Organizational Thought Leadership LinkedIn